Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really critical topic, neoplasia of the lower gastrointestinal tract. Basically, we're going to take a close look at colorectal cancers. We'll trace the entire clinical journey of this disease, from its very first silent cellular origins all the way through to diagnosis, treatment, and life after recovery. It's a fascinating and absolutely crucial topic, so let's get right into it.
Just to establish the stakes right off the bat, an alarming 70 to 90% of colorectal cancers are already advanced and causing symptoms by the time they're actually diagnosed. Because the growth of this disease is so insidious, a person can harbor it for literally years without a single clue. Getting a handle on this information, it's a total game changer. It can literally be a lifesaver.
So here's our clinical roadmap for today. We're going to cover 5 main stages: the genesis of cancer, spotting the warning signs, mapping the threat, taking medical action, and finally, life after treatment.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, the genesis of cancer, going from cellular mutation to a tumor.
If we want to understand where this all starts, we have to look at the polyp. Think of it as a small lump popping up right on the mucosal lining of the bowel. Now, while a lot of these are just benign, inflammatory, or hematomatous lumps, the neoplastic types, like your tubular or villous adenomas, carry some real malignant potential. This is especially true once they grow past the 2-centimeter mark. Really, it's that very first physical stepping stone toward cancer.
And it's so important to remember that this multi-step carcinogenesis process doesn't just happen overnight, right? It's driven by a stepwise accumulation of genetic mutations. Usually it starts with a hit to the APC gene, followed by KRAS and P53 mutations down the line. As these genetic hits pile up, a normal cell starts hyperproliferating. It turns into an early adenoma, then a late adenoma, before finally pushing past that threshold into a full-blown carcinoma. It's exactly this slow accumulation of genetic damage over time that makes the genesis of the disease so completely silent.
Moving on to part 2, spotting the warning signs. Let's talk about clinical presentation and symptoms.
Okay, so the actual physical location of the tumor completely dictates the warning signs you're going to see. Clinicians systematically map this out, using frameworks like DAPSA-CAMP to track symptom duration, associated issues, and patient history. But here's the crucial difference. Right-sided tumors rarely cause blockages. Instead, they tend to ulcerate. So you're looking at unexplained weight loss, anemia from low hemoglobin, and maybe just some vague abdominal pain. On the flip side, left-sided tumors often act like a blocked pipe. Patients present with altered bowel habits, outright obstruction, fresh bleeding or mucus per rectum, and tenesmus, which is that constant feeling of needing to pass stool. Pinpointing this anatomical difference is absolutely vital for making the right diagnosis.
Because this whole growth process is just so insidious, proactive screening is, without a doubt, our absolute best tool for intercepting the disease early. Something as simple as an annual fecal occult blood test can actually catch microscopic bleeding from those sneaky right-sided tumors, which reduces mortality by 1/3. Then, of course, we have the gold standard, the colonoscopy. And what makes the colonoscopy so incredibly powerful is that it isn't just diagnostic, it's highly therapeutic. If a physician spots a polyp, they can just remove it right then and there. Boom, threat neutralized. And for patients who might be too frail for the standard procedure, we can now use CT colonography. It's this amazing virtual scan using CO2 insufflation that gives us incredible detail of the bowel wall without needing a highly invasive procedure.
Which brings us to part 3, mapping the threat, focusing on staging mechanisms.
Once a diagnosis is confirmed, clinicians kind of have to act like cartographers. The modern standard for mapping out this threat is the TNM staging system. It works just like clinical coordinates. T stands for the depth of the primary tumor's invasion. N looks at regional lymph node involvement, and M checks for any distant metastasis. When you combine these coordinates together, they dictate the exact medical counterattack we need to take.
To really put the importance of staging into perspective, let's look at the historical Dukes classification. This starkly visualizes exactly why early detection is so paramount. Catch a tumor early at stage A, when it's limited to the superficial layers like the muscularis mucosae, and the treated 5-year survival rate is an incredibly high 93%. But look what happens as it spreads. Once it hits those regional lymph nodes in stage C, survival drops to 48%. And if it's metastasized to distant organs in stage D, that number absolutely plummets to just 6.6%. The map really does dictate the prognosis.
All right, part 4, taking medical action. Let's dive into interventions and management.
So how do we fight back? Well, the The medical response relies on a few major pillars, obviously tailored to the specific stage of the disease. Surgery is always the absolute mainstay if we're going for a potential cure. Think procedures like a hemicolectomy or an anterior resection. To back that up, we use radiotherapy. This is actually heavily utilized preoperatively for rectal cancers to shrink the tumor down and stop it from recurring locally. Then, we bring in chemotherapy. Adjuvant chemo regimens, like FOLFOX, are used to hunt down and eradicate any microscopic disease left behind, which significantly reduces mortality in those advanced stages. Finally, for metastatic disease, modern medicine has incredible biological therapies. Drugs like bevacizumab literally target the tumor's blood supply. It's a highly coordinated, multidisciplinary attack.
And finally, Part 5, Life After Treatment. Let's look at surveillance and survivorship.
Surviving the initial treatment is a massive victory, for sure. But to really grasp the stakes of ongoing surveillance, look no further than this quote from the U.S. Aerospace Medicine Guide. They note, "Colorectal cancer growth is insidious. Post-treatment surveillance is paramount to maximizing clinical outcomes and mitigating aeromedical and operational risk." Think about it. In incredibly high-stress environments like military aviation, a sudden complication from a hidden cancer occurrence would be absolutely disastrous. And since over 40% of stage 2 or 3 patients face a potential recurrence, having a strict, structured surveillance program is totally non-negotiable.
But why all the intense scrutiny right out of the gate? Well, check this out. 95% of recurrences strike within the first 4 years after definitive treatment. That specific window requires some really intensive monitoring. We're talking regular checks on CEA tumor markers, serial CT imaging of the chest and abdomen, and those routine interval colonoscopies. The good news? Once a patient makes it safely past that critical 4-year mark, the odds shift heavily in their favor.
I really hope this explainer has helped illuminate the clinical path of lower gastrointestinal neoplasia for you. We've traced how a single, silent cellular mutation builds over time into a life-threatening disease, and more importantly, how modern medicine can step in and intercept it. So, I want to leave you with this one vital thought. Considering just how silent and insidious the growth of this disease can be, where do you stand on your personal screening timeline? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me today, and as always, keep learning.